What is brickweed? Before weed became widely available in dispensaries, pot smokers had to resort to brickweed, sometimes called Schwag, Mexican, or common sale. In the olden times, weed was a black market commodity. Weed was usually grown in faraway lands. Weed sellers could reap great rewards for very little work and make great profit by selling poor-quality weed to consumers who had no other options. Brickweed is a perfect example of this. Brickweed refers to wood that has been harvested and then compressed into a brick of weed. Most can be found in Mexico. Many times weed is smuggled in large quantities across the border. The process of compressing weed into bricks made it a lot easier to transport. Brickweed was the most consumed type of weed before home cultivation started taking off in the 1970s and 1980s, although it was still quite popular right up until the early 2000s in some parts. Most brickweed originated in Mexico, South America, or Thailand, and had a very far distance to travel to reach the weed connoisseurs. Weed that was not in brick form was a rarity to the typical weed customer of the time. What is the quality of brickweed? The quality of brickweed will always be less than if the weed had not been compacted. Compressing weed with a press demolishes trichomes. Trichomes are crucial for the health of the weed plant, as well as the powerful effects weed enthusiasts experience when bricks of weed are formed. Whole plants, including stems, seeds, leaves, and the sought-after weed flower, are all squeezed together to form the brick of weed. Rarely is the crop harvested and given proper time to dry in the hot sun. Brickweed would often be so dry and brittle that it would crumble to a powder in your fingers, or it would smell of ammonia and be damp in the center. You never knew if you were going to get with brickweed, as several Reddit users have stated.
I carved into a brick with a bread knife. It was the best way to break it apart. Found a biggest cockroach inside, but I don't think that was intentional. I don't even know where to find a brick of shea now.
Where you unfold the brick and find 2 handfuls of seeds in the middle? Yeah, dealing with Mexican brick was always an adventure.
And they just pour out. I can still hear the sounds of them falling onto a tray.
My circle called it rainweed. The seeds just rained down.
Why is the demand declining? In the late 1980s, the demand for brickweed began to spiral downward. As indoor weed cultivation exploded, a whole new breed of weed user was born. Weed users started to read the High Times weed magazine. They started to get excited about the excellent weed they were seeing. It didn't take long before weed connoisseurs were demanding better weed that was like the weed that they saw in the High Times weed magazine. In addition to the High Times weed magazine, the demand for brickweed continued to decline, with weed legalization over the years playing a major role. And as public perceptions have changed over time, the medicinal use of weed has crept into the mainstream. Use of weed no longer carries the taint it once did. Weed clubs and dispensaries provide a legal high-quality weed and weed concentrates that are much better than most brickweed.
Information. Rise and stretch.
I want to get high, so high. I want to get high, so high. Well, it's the vocalistic, the funk I twisted, the semi-fi, bootify, funk on your discus. Oh, what you missed this, you got to bear witness. Catch a hoe and another hoe. Merry Christmas. Yes, I smoke shit straight off the roach clip. I wrote shit, pull the block. blunt and wants to approach it. Full with motion, make it sway like the ocean. The herb is more than just a powerful potion. What's the commotion? No, I'm not joking around. People learning about what they're smoking. The oven's on high when I roast the quail. Tell Bill Clinton to go and inhale. Inhale, then you feel the funk of the tower. Review the effects. I want to get high, so high. I want to get high, so high.
What is the future of brickweed? Back in its heyday, brickweed was the gold standard in weed. It was hard not to breathe, considering there were hardly any other options available for the weed consumer. Brickweed was once a popular option for weed lovers, as most times it was their only option. Brickweed, while not as popular as it once was, is still used until this day, thankfully, due to advancements in growing technology and legalization. Modern weed users usually have many options when it comes to weed consumption, leaving brickweed as a last resort. Other than as a last resort, some will seek out brickweed to take a trip down memory lane, reliving what they remember as the good old days, back when they thought weed was as solid as a rock and needed to be broken open with a knife. Some brickweed traditionalists will cling to the thought that brickweed can still be top shelf and potent. This may be due to sentimentality or reminiscing on early years of smoking. Brickweed is still held near and dear to a small population of weed smokers, while brickweed won't come with the strong effects or desirable smell or taste of modern weed. It can be a cheap way to smoke frequently if you are on a budget. This is especially important if you are a blunt smoker, which can burn through quite a bit of weed at a time. With the wide availability of weed from medical dispensaries, recreational shops, and online stores, the use of brickweed will continue to trend downward. Thanks for watching.